In the morning, everything looked fine. That was the worst part, because fine only works if you remember how it looked before. The first thing I noticed was the rope. Not because I was looking for it. Not exactly. I was doing that thing where you wake up and your brain is still soft and you're just trying to figure out where your arms are and why the air feels wet. You know you're outside before you remember where. Emma was already moving beside me, sleeping bag rustle, the quick little sigh she did when she sat up. She'd slept. That was the part that made me want to be happy. That was the part I kept trying to hold on to. Okay, she said, like she was surprised. That was actually fine. Her hair was smashed on one side, and she looked pleased with herself. She had that calm face people get when they've done something they've been building up in their head and it turned out to be boring. I nodded. I didn't say anything back right away. I was looking past her shoulder, through the tent door, toward the strip of lake we could see between the buckled zipper and the mesh. I had tied the kayak off to a half-sunk log the night before. It was a reservoir, so the shoreline was full of that. Those logs that used to be trees, now dead and silvered, pointing out to the water like they were trying to crawl away from it. The water was down that summer. There was a band of pale dirt around the edges where it had been higher and then wasn't. Everything looked skinned. We'd arrived late enough that I didn't want to waste time hunting for a perfect campsite. I found one that was flat enough and close enough to the water because Emma kept talking about how the lake was the one thing she liked about camping. The open space, the way you could see. Just don't put it right on the edge, she said earlier, like she was joking. Like she wasn't asking. I don't want to roll into it. You won't roll into it, I told her. I said it like I knew. It wasn't right on the edge, but it was close. The whole campsite was compressed. Trees to our backs, water in front, a narrow strip of dirt between. The kind of spot you pick because it looks like a postcard and because you're too tired to keep walking and looking. We dragged the kayak up just enough that it wouldn't bump in the little wind waves. I looped the rope around the log and tied the only knot I've ever had the patience to remember, the one you learn on your first day of anything and then use forever because it works if you pull it hard enough. Emma watched me do it and said, "Is that the same knot you used to tie the Christmas tree to your car?" "It's the same knot I use for literally everything," I said. She laughed, and then I told her, because I wanted to feel better about it, "It's fine. It's not going anywhere." I remember the feel of the rope in my hands. I remember the grit on it from being dragged along the bank. I remember pulling it tight and tucking the end under and thinking, briefly, that I should learn something better someday. I remember thinking it because it felt like a responsible thought to have around Emma. Now, in the gray morning, I could see the rope again, and the responsible thought turned into something else. The knot wasn't mine. I don't mean it was loose. I don't mean it had slipped and I'd had to retie it in the night and had forgotten. I don't mean that it looked a little different. It was an entirely different knot. Clean, structured, the rope coming off of it at the wrong angle. The loop sitting the way loops sit when someone knows what they're doing. It looked like the pictures you see in guides. The kind of thing you could rely on, which is a stupid detail to fixate on when you're trying not to panic, but it mattered. My knot is ugly. It always is. This one wasn't. Emma followed my gaze, but only for a second. She wasn't looking at the rope. She was looking at the kayak like it was proof. "It didn't float away," she said, brightly, like it was funny. "You were right." I didn't answer. I crawled out of the tent, barefoot, cold dirt on my feet, and walked straight to the kayak. The paddle was different too. I had thrown it in the night before without thinking much about it, just tossed it across the cockpit because we were trying to get dinner started before the light went. I remember it clacking against the plastic and making that hollow sound. I remember because Emma flinched. I remember watching it sit there, hoping it wouldn't fall into the water, and when I saw that it wouldn't, I just left it. Now it was positioned neatly along the side, blade tucked in, shaft parallel to the rim like it had been placed for transport. Not dropped, placed. The dry bag was also zipped. I know that because I had left it open. Not because I'm messy, but because the inside was damp, and I said out loud, "Let's air it out for a second." And I remember setting it open on the kayak seat while I fumbled with my headlamp. I could picture it, the mouth of it gaping, the top rolled down, the smell of lake water and sunscreen in it. Now it was rolled and sealed and clipped like someone had packed it up carefully. I stood there with my hand on the rope, not touching the knot because I didn't want to, and the lake made its little sounds like it always does. Small waves, a bird, and something splashing farther out. It took me a second to realize Emma had come up behind me. "What?" she said, still smiling a little. "What is it?" I heard myself make a noise that could have been a laugh if you weren't listening. "Nothing," I said. Emma leaned around me to look at the kayak like it was a regular object, like it hadn't been handled while we slept. "I mean," she said, "it's fine, right? It's still here." "Yeah," I said, it's fine." I said it because I'd spent weeks getting her to come on this trip. That was the whole thing. Emma and I were not the kind of friends who did outdoor stuff together. We were the kind of friends who met in lecture halls and drank cheap coffee and complained about roommates. We were the kind of friends who would go months without seeing each other and then fall right back into it. I'd gotten into camping later after college in that hungry way that people do when they realize their life is shrunk to walls and screens. Emma hadn't. Emma liked her apartment and her routines and her locks. She'd never said she was afraid to sleep outside. She would have hated that word. But she would say things like, "I don't know how people relax out there," and "What if someone comes by?" and "Don't you ever worry about, people?" I'd answer her the way people answer when they're trying to be kind and persuasive. "It's safe," I said. "People don't just wander around back there. It's not like that." "Okay," she'd say. "But you hear stories." "You hear stories about everything," I'd say, like it was a joke. Like stories were the problem. When she finally agreed, it felt like a win. Like I'd pulled her into my life a little. Like I'd done something good. So standing there, with proof that someone had been at our kayak, my first thought wasn't even fear. It was, I can't take this from her. It was, if I say it, it becomes the whole trip. It was, if I say it, I was wrong about safety. Emma's eyes flicked from the kayak to me. She could tell I was off. She knows me. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah, just tired," I responded. We made coffee. We ate the sad bagels that we brought because they don't crush in the cooler. Emma talked about the stars like she'd seen something incredible. She talked about how quiet it was. She kept saying quiet like it was a gift. I nodded at the right times and kept looking at the edge of the trees. There was no one. There was always no one. That's what made it hard. After breakfast, we loaded up and paddled out back onto the reservoir. The reservoir itself was huge, long and bent between foothills that rose into the beginning of the mountains. In some places, it widened out, and you could see the far shore like a dark line of green. In others, it pinched into coves, and the water got still, and the trees leaned over it. It should have been the kind of day that makes you forget your body and your problems. Emma relaxed almost immediately once we were out on the water. She sat in front and pointed at things, birds, places where the shoreline changed from rock to mud. She kept talking about how she was glad we'd done this, like she needed to keep saying it to make it true. I watched the other people. There weren't many. A few kayaks, a couple of fishing boats that moved slow and quiet, trolling near the edges, a rowboat with 2 men in it who looked like they'd been out on that lake their entire lives. They nodded at us as we passed, casual, not looking long. Every time we came around a bend and saw someone, my stomach did the same little drop. Not because they did anything, but because they existed. Because they were out here too, and I had been telling Emma for weeks that out here was empty. At one point, a small pontoon boat drifted near the shoreline on the other side of the water. People sitting on it like they were in a backyard, music low, Someone standing in the back with a fishing rod, not even casting, just holding it. I found myself watching their hands, watching where they looked. Emma turned around to grin at me. Water dripped off her chin. "See," she said, "people, normal people. It's not just you and the bears." I smiled. I made it look right. "Yeah," I said. We paddled until my shoulders were hot and sore. We landed on a different stretch of shore for night 2 because that had been the plan from the beginning, and because Emma was suddenly brave in the way that people get when nothing bad has happened yet. It got dark really fast. Not like back home where streetlights make everything in the evening last forever. It was the foothills, and the sun slid behind the ridge, and the temperature dropped like someone had flipped a switch. We were behind schedule. We'd kayaked farther than I meant to, partly because Emma wanted to keep going, partly because I didn't want to stop anywhere that felt too exposed, too visible from the water, too easy to find. Which is funny, because the places that felt hidden were the places that scared me more. When we came in, I was moving on muscle memory. I dragged the kayak up and tied it off without thinking. The rope was cold and wet in my hands. I did my ugly knot quick and sloppy because the light was going and I wanted to tent up before Emma's mood changed, before she noticed how close the trees were, before she started thinking again. I didn't set the paddle in any particular way. I threw it. It clacked. I didn't even look at the dry bags. I was already fumbling for my headlamp and scanning for a flat spot. I needed to get the tent set, make dinner. Emma's voice came from behind me. "This is perfect," she said, which meant she was trying to be easy. "It's fine," I said, and then immediately hated how sharp it sounded. I didn't like how the trees pinched in on us. I didn't like how close the brush was to where the tent would go. I walked the perimeter like that meant something, like I could see a boundary if I tried hard enough. I told myself I was checking for roots and widowmakers and anthills, real camping reasons. Mostly I was trying to make the air feel owned. We ate quickly, we cleaned up quickly, we crawled into the tent, and Emma was asleep in what felt like minutes. She made a small, contented sound and rolled toward the middle of the sleeping pad like she'd always belonged there. I lay awake, listening. Not for footsteps, not for voices, for the kind of sound you don't notice until you're primed for it. The soft scrape of something shifting near water. The small splash that's too close. The nylon whisper of the tent moving when there's no wind. When I heard nothing, it didn't help. Because nothing was what we'd had the first night, too. I thought about getting up to check the kayak. I thought about it hard enough that I could feel my muscles tighten like they were already doing it. I didn't. I told myself I'd do it in the morning. I told myself it was irrational. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I didn't want Emma to wake up and see me crawling out like a paranoid person, because then she would have questions, and then I would have to say something, and I couldn't make myself do that. At some point I slept, or I stopped being able to tell the difference. In the morning, the first thing I felt was shame, which is not the emotion you want on a camping trip, but there it was. Shame, and then that familiar drop of dread. I unzipped the tent and stepped out and walked toward the kayak too fast, like walking fast would change what I was about to see. Everything looked normal. The rope was tied in my ugly knot, the paddle was where I'd thrown it. The bags looked the way the bags do. Emma came up behind me, stretching, smiling like she'd earned something. "I slept," she said. "I really slept." "Good," I said. I stared at the kayak and realized, with this sudden, clean clarity that made my throat go tight, that I didn't actually know if it was normal, because I hadn't looked. I hadn't looked last night, not properly, not with the careful attention I had on night 1. I'd tied it off in the dark and moved on to get ready. We were in a rush. I didn't know the paddle angle. I didn't know if the bag had been open or closed. I didn't know if the rope had been looped once or twice before I pulled it. I didn't know, and I couldn't remember, and there was no proof either way. I'd been so busy worrying about someone being there that I'd stopped checking the only thing that could tell me. Emma talked about breakfast plans. She wanted to take pictures. She wanted to paddle out to the little island we saw in the distance. She wanted to do it all again someday, maybe with more friends. I said yeah and sure, and that sounds good, and let her have it, because I didn't know how to take it away without taking her apart. On the way out, we passed 2 other boats, a pair of kayaks near the shore, moving slow, a man and a woman not looking at us. Farther down, a small fishing boat idling in place, one person hunched over a tackle box. They didn't do anything. I still watched them until they were out of sight. When we got back to the car and started unpacking, Emma was still in that mood. The I can't believe I did it mood. She kept touching my arm when she talked, like she was grateful and didn't know how to say it without sounding dramatic. "Thank you," she said at one point, quietly, when she thought I wouldn't make a thing of it. "Thank you for making me come." I smiled, nodded. I didn't say what I should have said, which was something honest, something like "I'm sorry." At home, later, days later, maybe a week, I don't know, I was on my couch scrolling through photos on my phone. The pictures weren't even that good. Reservoir water doesn't photograph the way you think it will. The sky washes it out, the trees become a dark line. It wasn't an investigation. I wasn't zooming in for footprints. I wasn't trying to catch a face in the background. I was just looking, just letting myself have the normal version of the trip, the one where the lake is pretty and your friend is smiling and you did something healthy. Then I hit a photo from the first campsite. It was Emma standing by the tent, holding her mug up like a trophy, hair messy, cheeks a little sunburned, the tent behind her, the shoreline, the log, the kayak pulled up. The whole layout was in frame. I stopped scrolling. I didn't remember it being that close. In my head, the tent had been farther back, more room, more air between us and the water. Enough distance that if someone had been at the kayak, they would have been down there at the edge, separate. But in the photo, the tent is almost on top of the shore. There's barely a strip of dirt between the tent and the water. The log is right there, jutting out like a finger, less than a foot from the tent. The kayak is tied off so close to the tent that the rope makes a short, tight diagonal line. There isn't space for someone to stand at the knot without being at the front door of that tent and touching it. There isn't a way to do it at the water without also being at us. I zoomed in, not looking for anything, just trying to understand the scale, the angle, the distance, the dumb geometry of it. 2 feet, maybe, 3. Close enough that if someone had stood there long enough to change the knot, to move the paddle, to roll up the bag, they would have been close enough to hear the small sounds we made when we turned in our sleep. Close enough that if the tent fabric moved, it would have brushed their legs. Emma is smiling in the photo. The lake behind her looks clean and quiet, like it belongs to nobody. I stared at it until the camera screen dimmed. Then I tapped it again to keep it bright, because I didn't want to let it go yet. I didn't know what I was doing. I still don't. I just kept looking at that thin strip of dirt between the water and where we'd put our bodies and trying to make it bigger, like the picture was wrong, like I could stretch it if I needed to. But it stayed the same.